Hello everyone, my name is MansaMusa and welcome back to my channel, and today we have a very exciting video. I'm not quite sure yet if this is going to be a two-parter or if I'm going to make this a series. I'll have to see how the editing goes, but I am looking forward to getting into it today. So what is the big idea? Well, about a month ago or so, I was roaming around in the Advanced Wars by Web Discord and I saw this comment from Alexis, which intrigued me, where they bring up the idea of DJs doing an in-depth breakdown of all the COs, their best matchups, and their best units in order for new players to learn how to get an edge for each CO. Obviously, I'm not DJs, and this isn't going to be a very in-depth breakdown, but today I'm going to be tackling the last part of that question and going to be breaking down every CO's best unit and why it is especially powerful for them. And that last part is actually really important because every CO's best unit isn't just going to be the Mega Tank because of its crazy firepower. Instead, I will be looking at the value add of a unit for a given CO to determine which unit is best for them. So for example, Sammy's mechs are in much higher contention to be her quote-unquote best unit than her Mega Tanks. With all that being said, let's hop right into it and discuss the Tier 4 COs. Tier 4, the garbage tier. Starting first with my favorite CO in all of Tier 4, Adder, and low-key he might actually be my favorite CO in the entire game. Adder's best unit is his infantry. Now, some people are already going to be mad at me and want the mechs, and to be honest, I can see why. Adder's mechs are definitely some of the strongest in the game. The +1 move on power allows them to outrange arties, which they normally can't do, and overall allows for greater coverage of other units than normal mechs, especially considering how fast his COP can charge. Another honorable mention for Adder is his battlecopters, as the extra +1 movement allows them to outrange pretty much every other Tier 4 CO's battlecopters, especially in battlecopter on battlecopter matchups, and often makes your opponent incredibly defensive and forces multiple anti-air builds. All that being said though, the infantry is still Adder's best infantry by far, and it really comes down to just one thing. 4 movement on infantry absolutely breaks the game. There's no other way to say it. Maps are designed around 3-move infantry for capture phases and contested properties, and breaking that, especially in the early game with just a 2-star power, allows Adder to often win in the income game early on, getting faster caps on contested cities, and also allows Adder to pressure later on in the game, getting important flips alongside big pushes. This makes Adder's pushes impossible to respond to at times, especially if he chains COPs on back-to-back turns. Additionally, in the late game attacks, the extra plus move allows infantry to both trap enemy units and defend Adder's own units for tactics such as arty locks, making Adder one of the best, if not the best, aggro COs in all of Tier 4. Going now to the other movement specialist of Tier 4, Cole's best units are her battlecopters. Unlike her ground vehicles, Cole's battlecopters don't suffer from the poor defense provided by roads that she has to sit on in order to get her day-to-day bonus. No matter where her battlecopters are, they're gonna die to anti-air no matter what, or enemy battlecopters, but by sitting on roads, the extra attack allows them to do significantly more damage to enemy units, like medium or neo-tanks on low defense tiles, and most importantly allows her battlecopters to one-shot Adder infantries on roads on her COP on maps with just 1 tower. Obviously, this is all at the cost of an additional star per CO power popped when compared to Adder, so I still think she is significantly worse than Adder on most maps. That being said, there is no denying the power of one-shotting infantry for wall-breaking potential, especially on maps that are incredibly road-heavy, like Scorpion Operation, and thus Cole can find her niche on some maps. Speaking of battlecopters, Grimm's best unit is by far the battlecopter as well. His battlecopters are so good that they are actually in contention for some of the best in the entire game, and are definitely the best value unit for him. Because Grimm's units are already so prone to dying anyway because of the -20% defense on all of his units, Grimm doesn't really care that his battlecopters are going to die to anti-air, they were going to die anyway. But the extra 30% attack power that those battlecopters have actually does do wonders, essentially turning Grimm's battlecopters into mini bombers. With just 1 tower, Grimm's battlecopters can one-shot infantry on roads, and can even one-shot infantries on planes with a good enough roll. Grimm's battlecopters can also one-shot opponents' battlecopters with a max roll, allowing for ridiculous wall breaks in both cases. On power, it is even more ridiculous. With Super CO power popped, Grimm's battlecopters can one-shot tanks on roads and planes, decimating armies in the process. With his battlecopters sure to fall anyway, Grimm can spam these units out with infantry to win the unit count battle and decimate the opponent with his powers. This is a fight Grimm will essentially need to win though, given his powers provide no movement bonuses, so any pushes will have to be decisive, as they cannot rely on faster reinforcements in the way Adder, Jake, or Cole can when they pop their cop or scop respectively. Speaking of Jake, it's no surprise, but the Artie specialist of Tier 4's best unit is the Artie. Now, it was actually a bit of a closer pick than you think. Jake's direct units are monstrous, especially with their planes bonus on Cop or Scop being magnified, and the extra movement given by his Super CO power. But because the Artie gets all of these benefits besides the extra movement provided by his Scop, and the +1 range during either Cop or Scop, Jake's Artie takes the cake as his best unit. Most notably, Jake's artillery hit like trucks on Super CO power. With just one tower, Jake's Arties have a guaranteed one-hit KO against Tier 4 infantry on cities, which is ridiculously powerful, especially given their extra range. It makes it so Jake easily outranges his opponents, especially on mountainous maps like Celeste or Lucifer near the front lines. Just this threat alone can allow Jake to pressure and win contested areas on the maps, and makes his Artie easily his best unit. Moving on to the vehicle specialist of Tier 4, Jess is often considered a mini Max with stronger tanks, but unlike Max, weaker infantry, which really holds her back on most maps in Standard. But we are here to talk about the positives, and on that note, I think Jess's Neos are disgustingly good. Obviously, all of her vehicles get the movement bonuses of her Cop and Scop, +1, 2, +1, and +2 movement respectively, but the extra firepower that also comes with the powers, to me, is most notable on Jess's Neos. With just one tower on Scop or on Scop, Jess's Neos can one-shot enemy tanks on cities, and can even one-shot enemy medium tanks on planes with the Scop active. In addition, her base matchup against Adder's Neos on planes of 8-4 instead of the more common 8-5 trade that we would see in, let's say, an Adder versus Adder match, makes enemy Neos much less impactful, while also making sure her own Neos have less chip damage, being closer to 9 HP than 8 HP. Overall, all of Jess's vehicles are great, but the wall-breaking ability and sturdiness of her Neos takes the cake for me as her best unit. Moving now to Sonya. Important note for Sonya here is, just like all other COs we've covered so far, we are considering her for Standard. So the extra vision on her recons, which probably makes them her unquestionably best unit in Fog, won't be considered here. Instead, we focus on the other, I think, greatly underrated aspect of Sonya's kit, which is her 1.5x damage counterattacks. When it comes to that, I think Sonya's best unit is the Bomber. At a baseline in Advanced Force by AWBW, you generally need 2 anti-airs if you're going to deal with an opponent's Bomber, because the Bomber can actually outrange a single anti-air, so you do need a second one to reinforce. With Sonya, you really need like 3 anti-airs, and in actuality, you really need a fighter, because her matchup against anti-airs is oppressive. Even with a full HP Adder anti-air on planes getting the first strike, the engagement could be as bad as 6-3 for the Adder player. If the anti-air is even slightly weakened, like from a tank hit while it was on a city, it will most likely die. In that same engagement we just talked about, if the Adder anti-air was instead on 7 HP instead of 10, the engagement with the Bomber would be the Bomber going down to 5 HP and the Adder anti-air being fully killed. It's just crazy stuff. Not to mention the obvious here, but on Super CO powers, Sonya's Bombers will actually attack first, essentially making them invincible to anti-air for a turn. Because of this, you'll need to spam out fighters against Sonya to deal with her Bombers. But these fighters are still going to be countered by Sonya's own anti-air and fighters of her own, making them a very difficult engagement to try to win. If you end up losing that battle and Sonya gets air superiority, Sonya can still win, even in Standard. Introducing Tier 3, Global Damage, the Healer, and also Lash. Hopping into Tier 3, we have the protagonist of the cartridge games himself, Andy. Like some of his cartridge opponents in Tier 4, Andy's best unit is also his battlecopters. While I mentioned in the previous tier Grimm's copters may arguably pack the biggest punch in terms of value, Andy's copters are potentially even more scary. Notably, this is not due to their firepower. Andy's battlecopters get no bonuses and thus are actually weaker than many other COs on raw damage. Why Andy's copters are so scary is because of his powers, and in particular his Super CO power. Andy's hyper upgrade heals all units 5 HP while also giving them +1 movement and +10 attack. This is absolutely disgusting for Andy on maps where copters often have to fight each other due to bad terrain for anti-air, maps like Darkling Woods or Scorpion Operation for example. On these types of maps, Andy can take copter engagements with opponents, trading 8-3 fights, and then retreat his injured 3 HP copters to safety, all while building charge. Do this enough, and he can pop his Super CO power, healing all of his injured battlecopters back to 8 HP. Basically good as new, and with +1 movement and +10 attack on the Super CO power turn. In scenarios like this, Andy instantly gets air superiority and basically got free battlecopter engagements against his opponent in the process. It is for this reason that you need to avoid copter-on-copter engagements whenever possible against Andy, and build the required anti-airs to make sure you kill his copters. This is very annoying on those bad terrain maps I mentioned earlier, but I promise it is necessary against Andy. I can't stress it enough, you have to kill his units if you're going to win the game, and because his copters can really only fully die to anti-air, Andy's battlecopters become incredibly strong. Final note when fighting Andy, on higher incomes maps, it is almost always worth it to build a fighter, as this solves the battlecopter issue we just talked about on bad terrain maps, and you don't have to rely on anti-airs as much. Just watch out for the fighter-on-fighter matchup against Andy, as those are equally as good for Andy as the copter-on-copter engagement. For all these reasons, the battlecopter is Andy's best unit. Moving on to Drake. Drake is an interesting CO for this video, as he mainly relies on his powers, especially the 2 HP global damage provided by his Super CO power, to stay competitive in Tier 3. In fact, the only really notable unit that Drake has is his copters, which are actually 30% weaker than other COs and thus are rarely, if ever, built. That being said, I do think there's one unit for Drake that shines a bit brighter than all others, and that is his black boats. Like Sammy and Sensei, who we will talk about later, Drake gets +1 movement on his black boats. This makes huge differences on maps like Stitch Monster, where Drake black boats can ferry infantry from the ports to the front line in 1 turn, where it take other COs in Tier 3 2 turns. This creates massive advantages for Drake on maps like these due to the increased tempo of his caps. In addition to the +1 movement, Drake's black boats also get +10% defense. This used to be as high as +25% extra defense back in the day, but was nerfed down to +10% recently by the developers of the Advanced Wars by website. And while that may not sound like much, especially for a unit that's not going to be taking direct engagements like the black boat, that extra defense is actually huge for Drake on maps where there's a pre-deployed black boat on an exposed HQ. This extra defense makes Drake's HQ sturdier compared to his opponents in Tier 3. Now, admittedly not by much, the black boat will still die to 3 hits from full HP artilleries, but against weakened attacking units, like Andy artilleries that may have just been typhooned for example, this can be a nice buff, allowing Drake's black boats to live on 1 or 2 HP where other CO's black boats would have just died. This extra sturdiness combined with the plus movement that I talked about earlier gives Drake a unit that really stands out in his kit for a CO that normally depends on global damage powers. For all these reasons, I think the black boat is clearly Drake's best unit. Next in Tier 3 we have Lash, and Lash is actually my new darling of Tier 3 for aggressive COs now that Kindle has been moved up to Tier 2. And unfortunately, she is not as good as her black hole counterpart, but Lash still has a lot of good things going for her. In particular, I think Lash's mechs are actually some of the best units in the game. Now, notably, this is only really true on maps where there is high terrain and contested areas, such as on Seashell Ocarina or New Kids on the Block. But on these maps, Lash mechs can be some of the best defensive or offensive tools available to her, especially if they're being assisted by APCs or T-copters. In these scenarios, Lash mechs can do a crazy amount of damage against opponents' tanks. Even without a tower on the map, Lash's mechs can 2-shot a tank on a city as long as both mechs are on forested terrain or better, and only need to be on plains or better if there is just one comm tower on the map. But Lash's real power shines on her Super CO power. On Scop, Lash's mechs can 1-shot anti-air on plains or worse, and can 1-shot tanks on roads. If the mech is on a mountain, Lash can even 1-shot tanks on plains. Against beefier units like medium tanks or neo tanks, Lash can deal up to 3 HP of damage per mech hit in a mountain while on Scop, while taking basically no damage in return due to the extra defense stars, allowing for high value trades. It is the power and value of these mechs that allows Lash to have winning matchups against her Tier 3 opponents on maps like New Kids on the Block, despite being arguably the weakest CO in the tier in general. Final note for Lash is that unlike Adder and Sammy, who also get great use out of their mechs, Lash's mechs get no extra movement bonuses from her powers, making them dependent on high terrain and a nearby base close to a contested front to find the most value. Not the hardest thing to find on most maps, but still worth mentioning. Moving on to Rachel. Now, on the surface, you might think her best unit would be the infantry due to the BS rolls that they can get with Lucky Lass and her general preference for 2-base maps. But for me, her battlecopters are even stronger. Like I mentioned, Rachel is most viable on 2-base maps because that is where her covering fire is most damaging. In these types of maps, infantry are good, but battlecopters are even better due to the increase in unit count and the ability to counter tanks. In addition, while Rachel's copters don't have any inherent advantage, their high mobility allows Rachel to both move missile locations by attacking certain units that may be pulling the missiles in bad spots. and or sack the battlecopters in order to get enough charge for surprise missiles in positions where the opponent was not expecting her to pop the scop on that turn. This is especially true in live play. These sacking plays for power also help Rachel get the first scop of the match, which is incredibly nice in matchups against COs like Drake or Andy. Against Drake, it helps you make sure that you get the second covering fire before he gets a second Typhoon. The second Typhoon, of course, will be especially deadly if you aren't winning by then, so it's very important to get that second covering fire first. And against Andy, it helps you kill as many units as possible before they are hyper upgraded. This is especially true if the scop was a surprise to Andy and he didn't position his units perfectly. For a CEO who depends mostly on her powers, Rachel gets a surprising amount of utility out of her copters for the reasons we just talked about, and thus for me, it's her best unit. Introducing Tier 2, the Aggros and the Busted Scops. Moving now to Tier 2, with the old queen of Tier 3 herself, we now have Kindle. And for me, Kindle's best units are her tanks. Somehow it took to Tier 2 to finally talk about the main unit in the game that we play, but yeah, Kindle's tanks are absolutely ridiculous. In Advanced Wars by Web, tanks are balanced around the fact that they have a fair amount of counterattack damage when engaging with the opponent's tanks. In neutral matchups on planes, the average tank trait is 8-5, which, while worse for the tank that got first strike, isn't completely devastating and allows the tank to retreat while potentially punishing the attacking tank with the second tank that was covering the first one. This all goes out the window though when talking about Kindle. When Kindle gets a first strike on a city, which every CO in the game is trying to do anyway, her trades are more likely to be a 9-3 against a tank on a plane. And thus, if you try to punish her with a healthy tank on a plane, the resulting trade leaves the Kindle tank on the city at 5 HP, and your brand new healthy tank that you came in to punish with on 7 HP. That is crazily good trade value for Kindle in these matchups. By simply playing as you should, sitting on high terrain places like cities, Kindle gets amazingly great engagements. Her powers make this even more broken for her tanks. The Urban Blight makes it super easy to clear enemy units on cities, and then Kindle can bring in her own tanks with Cop active and go crazy. A Kindle tank on city with Cop active and just one tower can one-shot an enemy tank on plains or roads, and against a medium tank can get a crazy 7-7 trade. Against infantry, she can one-shot them on cities or worse terrain on Cop active with one tower. Frankly, this is just OP on maps with lots of urban terrain. It is for this reason that Kindle is very map dependent. On higher income maps with lots of properties near the front line, she can become straight up busted within Tier 2. On lower income maps where cities are more evenly dispersed and not in a centralized area, she is much weaker. Her map dependency really didn't matter as much when she was in Tier 3 because she was already super strong even in maps that had less contested properties. But now that she is in Tier 2, her competition is much stronger, and thus she is much less of an auto pick, and you find more situations where you'll be taking Max instead. Speaking of that harder competition, we go to the king of aggro play in Tier 2 himself, Max. Max, like Kindle before him, has been the poster child of broken tanks in Advanced Wars for a very long time. But unlike Kindle, Max doesn't rely on urban terrains to get his benefits. Instead, he gets plus 20% attack on all of his direct units as a day-to-day power. Less than Kindle's 40% extra firepower on urban terrain, but the ability to have it on any terrain makes it better in most cases. Max tank's most common trade with just one comm tower on the map is 9-4 against a neutral tank. This is slightly worse than Kindle like we just talked about, but again, Max isn't forced to be on urban terrain to get these benefits. This makes it easier for Max as compared to Kindle to get wall breaks and win on multiple parts of the map at the same time. Additionally, for all the same reasons a 9-3 tank trade instead of an 8-5 tank trade were broken from a balance perspective, a 9-4 tank trade is basically the same level of broken for Max, and like Kindle before him, it only gets crazier with power popped. With COP power active and just one comm tower, Max can one-shot infantry on plains or roads, and with SCOP active and one tower, Max's tanks can one-shot neutral tanks on roads with a good roll, and can one-shot anti-air on plains or roads. In addition to this impressive firepower, Max's super CO power and SCOP also give him +1 movement and +2 movement respectively. This is a huge benefit when compared to Kindle, as it allows him to get these powerful engagements while his powers are active, and also allows him to reinforce into contested areas easier as well. These reinforcement buffs are especially helpful for aggro COs like Max, as he will often be pushing past neutral areas to put, get this, max pressure on his opponents. Final point for Max is a quick honorable mention for his battlecopters. They are by far some of the best in tier 2 due to their extra firepower and versatility and the +1 and 2 movements on Cop and Scop respectively that we talked about earlier. And they can be great counters to tech ups, which is very nice for Max considering artillery normally fill that role, and of course Max's artillery are some of the worst in the entire game. So even in scenarios that I've talked about previously where you are getting very aggressive with Max's tanks, you always do want to put in some battlecopters as well. But all that being said, I still think the tank is clearly Max's best unit. From aggressive COs to adaptable COs, we now have Olaf, and Olaf is actually a very interesting case in tier 2. Depending on his matchup, his ideal playstyle will differ significantly. Against aggressive COs like Kindle or Max, Olaf wants to play more defensively, and against more passive COs like Eagle, he wants to try to push the pace. This makes it a bit difficult to rank a singular best unit for Olaf, but I think the artillery does a good job in both cases, so I will go with that. In defensive situations, the arty can help stall conflict, leading to unit buildup in a more devastating Winter Fury, and in aggressive situations, the snow provided by either Blizzard or Winter Fury can allow Olaf's artilleries to trap units that were previously able to evade. Olaf doesn't have any day-to-day firepower changes, and nothing really changes when he pops his Scop in terms of firepower, so generally his arties aren't any better than anyone else's in tier 2. But with the 2 HP of global damage provided by the Winter Fury, Olaf's arties can still get some nice clears. Most notably, with just one comm tower, Olaf's artillery are guaranteed to clear infantry on cities or worse terrain during Winter Fury. And against powerful units like Neo-tanks, they can do up to 5 damage, dropping a Neo-tank down to 3 HP. Overall though, Olaf was designed around his powers and being relatively neutral beyond that. And for that reason, I think all of Olaf's units can find great utility. The artillery is just a bit more likely to find that extra bump in more aggressive and defensive scenarios, and for that reason, I think it takes the cake as Olaf's best unit. Known as the infantry specialist of the entire game, Sammy's best units are undoubtedly her infantry and her mechs, but there does remain the question of which one of these 2 units is her best. To me, it's very clearly the standard infantry. While Sammy's mechs are some of the best of the entire game, if not the best, with their extra movement and firepower on powers, their utility is outshined by the extra +1 movement her infantry have compared to her mechs. On Superpower, Sammy's infantry will have 5 total movement and the ability to instantly capture any property regardless of the HP of the infantry. It is one of the most broken powers in the entire game, and while Sammy's mechs also get this power, the extra movement of the infantry and lower cost makes them much better for Sammy to spam out on the vast majority of maps. In terms of the firepower advantage that mechs have over the infantry, Sammy gets this by instead teching up her units, getting more medium tanks and neo tanks than her opponent due to massive advantages in the capture game. I think there is an idea amongst newer or lower elo players that Sammy's mechs should replace her tanks, and in most maps this is simply just not effective. They don't have the movement they need to be threatening, even with Cop or Scop active, and thus they just can't provide the same pressure that teched up units for Sammy can. In fact, in terms of just firepower and aggression, Adder mechs are actually not that far off from Sammy mechs. No one can compare to Sammy infantry though. They are more powerful, harder to interrupt, and more dangerous on Super CO power than almost any other unit in the game. They're by far her best unit for me. Like Sammy before him, Eagle is a CO who finds the most utility from his Super CO power, often being in strictly losing or tying game states before a double turn provided by his Super CO power allows him to surge into leads, sometimes winning the game on the spot. Notably, Eagle's infantry and mechs do not get a double turn on Scop, which essentially immediately eliminates them from this video and the conversation of best unit. But that leaves a lot of interesting options left though for who will win. Immediately interesting options for Eagle are his artilleries, which with the double turn can move and shoot on Scop, allowing them to have far more effective range than even Grit or Jake artilleries, especially in stall games where Eagle can have multiple artilleries defending each other. Another shout out is to Eagle's fighters, which get a ridiculous 18 range on Super CO power, allowing them to pick off a bomber and attack the fighter protecting said bomber in most situations, especially if the opponent is not defending perfectly. To me though, Eagle's best unit is just his standard battlecopter. Obviously he gets all the advantages of a double attack on Scop as his fighter does, albeit with less range, but what makes Eagle's battlecopters the most broken to me is the day-to-day bonus Eagle gets as well. Day-to-day, Eagle's area units get plus 15 attack and plus 10 defense. Now, obviously this also applies to his fighters, but given their cost and the limited units that you can attack with a fighter, I think the Battlecopter provides more value. With just one tower not on Super CL power, Eagle's copters can get 9-2 trades against other copters, while most CEOs get a standard 8-3 trade. And against tanks on planes, Eagle can get as much as 7 damage on opponent's tanks, where other CEOs can barely get above 6. The final crazy advantage for Eagle's copters are on maps without towers. On these maps, Eagle's extra defense shines through. An Olaf copter on copter engagements against an Eagle copter can be as bad as 6-5 for Olaf on the first strike. A ridiculous engagement, especially considering the normal lopsided nature of copter on copter engagements. Even crazier for Eagle is on Scop, even on maps with one tower, Eagle's copters are not one-shot by Olaf anti-airs, leaving them on 1 HP, making them insanely effective walling units on the second Scop turn. While Eagle's artilleries and fighters are certainly fun, to me the copters find the most utility throughout the game, not just on the Super CL power. And for this reason, they are his best unit for me. And I think that is where we are going to stop for today. We have now discussed every CEO's best unit from tier 4 all the way through tier 2. The next video on my channel will be tier 1 and tier 0, the broken tier CEO's best units. I have written the script for that video already, but I just need to now break it up and get through this video, edit it, and make sure I get it out on a reasonable time frame, because I've had this video in the works for a while now, so I just kind of want to get something out there. But yeah, you guys can be looking forward to that shortly after this first one is posted. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching, everyone. My name is MansaMusa, and remember, the best unit for a CEO is whatever unit you just built. Bye, guys.